Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming on and registering for this webinar. My name is Andy Hornbuckle from SPEL Stormwater in Australia, and I'm also one of the co-founders of Stormwater Shepherds. We have 70 people registered for this webinar today, and I can see there's a lot of people piling in now. We're up around 30 people, and the attendees list is climbing pretty dramatically. So thank you very much for your interest. The reason that I'm promoting stormwater utilities using the American term utility so much is because I'm intensely passionate about stemming or preferably stopping the flow of gross and plastic pollution into our rivers and oceans. And I believe the way to do that is upstream in the catchments where the pollution is actually occurring. I've got the Stormwater Shepherds website up on our screen there, so please jump on, have a browse around and follow us. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook. So I've engaged Professor Warren Campbell because he's got a lot of experience with stormwater utilities in the United States. He's going to cover off on what a utility means. The way I'd say it from an Aussie perspective is that it's a dedicated department or entity within council that is wholly responsible for stormwater matters, and it can it's sustainably funded by a levy or a fee from the ratepayers. And so Professor Warren from Western Kentucky University is going to present his 2019 survey results for more than 1,700 stormwater utilities across the USA. That's across 40 states, as well as 20 Canadian utilities. So there's a lot of data. Now, the thing I like about the professor's survey is that he personally coordinates it every year, and he's done this since 2007. There is some other surveys in the US, but it's voluntary for the utility people to comply or put their information in, whereas Professor Campbell personally makes sure that he collects the data, so he keeps a very accurate survey. So without any further ado, I'll hand the screen over to the professor. Just if anyone wants a CPD certificate for watching this, when we send around the email later with the recording of the webinar and the PowerPoint slides, there'll be a link there where you can apply for a CPD certificate. If something goes wrong, it doesn't work, be totally free to send me an email and I'll get it sorted out for you. So thank you very much for your attendance. Okay, Warren, I'll just hand you the screen.
Very good. Andy, thank you. And I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk to folks in Australia. I'm going to have to move some things around. Bear with me just a minute here. You have my screen, right? You're seeing it?
Not yet, no.
Oh, okay. Let me try this. Did that do it?
Yep, I can see. I think you need to switch to the other screen. I can see your PowerPoint view.
Oops.
That's it. Got it.
Okay. All right. Well, I have a lot of information I want to share with you, so I'm going to jump right into it. And where we're going with this, I'm going to talk about not just stormwater utilities, but also other methods of funding stormwater programs. I want to talk about how common stormwater utilities are in the United States. My focus is going to be on stormwater utilities because I think they're the fairest way to raise money, have a consistent source of funding. I'm going to talk about what kind of fees are charged, monthly fees. I'm going to talk about different methods of collecting the fees, different types of fee systems. I'm going to talk about some of the obstacles that you encounter when you try to set up a stormwater utility. And I'm going to talk about who is going to oppose you when you set up a stormwater utility. And I'm going to give you a case study, very personal to me, about how not to set up a stormwater utility. And then I will also give you a brief study, several case studies where you can do it, the right way to do it. So finally, I want to give you some helpful information, some recommendations, and then at the end, we summarize what we've done. I have a stormwater utility survey. As Andy said, we've been doing this since 2007. The current stormwater utility survey is this one in 2019, published just last month. And I've given Andy a copy of my slides. And you have a link in the lower right-hand corner where you can get to the stormwater utility. But in the United States, in those 1,700 some odd stormwater utilities, our median fee is about $475 US. And when I did this, I looked at the exchange rate, and that's about 684 Australian. And the average fee was 585. And the size of the community that has stormwater utility is, the median size is fairly small. Any community is large enough to have a stormwater utility. We've identified one that only has a couple of hundred customers, so it's there. So in my stormwater utility survey, you get the stormwater utility communities, their location, type of fee system they use, the monthly base fee, and the distribution of base fees, and I'll show you some of that data in a minute, population of the cities that have stormwater utilities, and also political or legal challenges that the different utilities have faced, and the outcome where there has been an outcome of the court challenges. And then I've been able to locate some of the annual revenues that you're able to get, but for just a few dollars in a city of any size, you can get, raise several $1 million to do your stormwater program. Now, when I do my survey, I use community websites, municipal codes, and I have a reason for doing that. Don't have time to go over it now, but basically I try to sample the entire population of stormwater utilities in the US and Canada. So here's
Warren.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you just tell us on those fees, are they weekly or monthly?
Monthly, sorry. Yeah, that's monthly fees. Okay, so these are the locations of stormwater utilities in the United States. We have, as Andy told you, there are 40 states that we've been able to identify that have stormwater utilities. There are several states that have over 100 of them. And once you get one in a state, normally they will start to form fairly rapidly. You've got to get one going. Once that does it, that's a trigger, and a lot more will actually develop. Now, one of the things that surprised me is there doesn't seem to be a correlation. You know, in the United States, Democrats or the liberals never met a tax we didn't like, whereas conservatives, you know, they don't want any taxes, any fees. So you would think that it would be more difficult to set up a stormwater utility in a conservative state. The red states here are the ones that voted for the Republican candidate, the conservative candidate in the 2016 presidential election. The blue states are the ones that voted for the Democratic candidate. And what you will see, there are Texas, Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Florida have more than 100 stormwater utilities in each state, and they all voted for the conservative candidate. On the other side, the Democratic side, Washington and Minnesota both have more than 100 utilities. Minnesota, I've been able to identify the most utilities in any state for the state of Minnesota. So politics does not seem to be a contributing factor as to whether or not a stormwater utility will form. This is a map of the stormwater fees. It's kind of all over the place. And the monthly fee runs anywhere from about 83 cents all the way up to about $45 a month. It's a little hard to tell anything from this, but if you take the median fee from each state, the highest median fee is the state of Washington in the extreme northwest with an $11.70 monthly fee. The states with 0 as the median fee do not have any stormwater utilities that I've been able to identify. And it's kind of disappointing to me. Hurricane Katrina, which caused about more than $100 billion worth of damage in 2005, the states that were most affected by Hurricane Katrina do not have a stormwater utility. And there doesn't really seem to be any pattern for the fee in relative to politics. Now, Once a stormwater utility is formed, there are going to be people that are going to want to sue you and try to get the stormwater utility invalidated. And this is a map of the challenges that I've been able to find. The ones that had a favorable court outcome, I have a green dot. The ones where no outcome has occurred yet, as far as I can tell, are pending, and the ones with an unfavorable outcome are in red. So some of these, the poster child for the most unfavorable outcome is Atlanta, Georgia, which got their stormwater utility, started collecting money, had collected millions of dollars, got challenged in court. It was invalidated and they had to return the money that they had already collected. So you got to be very careful how you set it up and make sure that it follows local, state, and federal laws. Now here's my stormwater utility, the very first one, and I've done it every year since 2007 with the exception of 1 year. And here's the most recent one. It's a free download off the internet. However, it is not, and here is the link which you can go to get to the earlier stormwater utility surveys. But it's not the only survey out there. There's actually an older one done by Black & Veatch, and they do it every 2 years. The most recent one was done in 2018. And they're different in their approaches. Again, you know, I have data from 1,700 stormwater utilities, whereas Black & Veatch have fewer than 100. They actually send out a questionnaire to a number of stormwater utilities, and the ones that respond, there are fewer than 100. So my data, I feel like, is less biased, although it is biased toward larger communities because they tend to have better websites that you can get to and you can locate information on whether or not they have stormwater utility. The smaller ones, they sometimes fall under the radar. But you know, I do have 1,700. Every one that I can get, I get data on them. Black & Veatch, on the other hand, is not an unbiased data set because they get data that's restricted to the stormwater utilities that respond to their questionnaire. However, Black & Veatch has the advantage in depth of information. This is 1 page from their stormwater utility. Got a lot of in-depth information on there, including what they use the stormwater utility for. In the United States, they're used for flood control, for water pollution control, or for both. They can be used for either one or both of them. So I feel like that both of the surveys have a place, and you really ought to look at both of them because Black & Veatch has very detailed information on the stormwater utilities that respond to their survey. Now, this is focused on stormwater utilities, but it's not the only method that's used to fund stormwater programs. The most common method is general fund. This is, you know, the money that a community raises in sales taxes, that they raise in property taxes, and in some cases, income taxes. So this is the general budget, the money that a community has to do their operations. The advantage is you don't have to expend any political capital to use general fund money. The disadvantage is you have to compete with putting police on the street, education, fixing potholes, all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, stormwater is forgotten infrastructure, and people don't even think about it. Every stormwater, every drainage system in the world works great as long as it's not raining. But they only think about it when you do have a flood or a major pollution event. So that's their disadvantage. Another way of raising money for it is through an addition to the property tax. And my example for that is Maricopa County, Arizona, which is where Phoenix is. The advantage is they can set their rate each year to assure that they have the right amount of funding that they need to do their operations. The disadvantage is they have to set their rate every year, so they have to beseech their elected officials to set a rate that they can get the things done that they need to get done. So they have to go through that every year. The other thing is it's an ad valorem tax according to value. So what that means is if you can build on a 5-acre or 2 or 3 hectare plot, a 100-story building, and it may cost you $1 billion to build that, billion with a B. You can take a 5-acre plot and build a parking lot maybe for $1 million, and they both produce the same amount of stormwater runoff, but the 100-story building is going to be paying 1,000 times more for their stormwater fee than the plot. So it's not fair. The other example I have is sales tax, and my example for that is Clark County, Nevada, and that's where Las Vegas is. And Las Vegas is one of the driest cities in the United States, but people realize they have a flood problem. When it does rain, it's bad, and they've had something like 20 people killed over the last few decades in flooding. So the advantage is when they brought up the referendum to get people to vote on it, it passed by a 2-to-1 margin because people realized they had a problem. And so they get a portion of the sales tax to run their flood control district. And the advantage is political. The people in Las Vegas, the residents, are perfectly happy to let those tourists that come to spend money in the casinos and go to shows and stuff, they're happy to have them pay for a good portion of their stormwater program. The disadvantage is the income goes up and down with the economy. In plus years, they would raise something like more than $90 million. But when the mortgage crisis hit, it dropped down to $60 million. So they lost a third of their income. It's also non-fair because, again, it's an ad valorem tax. So that brings us to a stormwater utility. Andy told you it is a recurring fee. In the United States, some communities collect it monthly, some collect it bi-monthly, some collect it quarterly, and some collect it annually. That money is put into an enterprise fund and only can be used for the stormwater program. So whether it's raining or not, the money is collected. The disadvantage, there is a political cost to try to set one up. The advantage is they can be made fair if you choose the right fee system, and the funding is consistent. You always have the funding, it's there, and you don't have to wait for the next big flood to get an influx of money that you can use to take care of your problems or your pollution problems as well. So it is a fee, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between taxes and fees. In the United States, taxes usually must be approved by voters. So they have to vote on whether a tax is going to be enacted or not. Tax exempt organizations like churches do not pay. Taxes are normally, in most cases, ad valorem according to value, and there is no relationship between the service rendered and the cost of the tax. Now, a fee, on the other hand, normally, not always, but normally in the United States, can be approved by the local government. Tax exempt organizations pay, and they're going to scream when they have to pay a new fee, but they do pay unless they are explicitly exempted in the ordinance that sets up the utility. And if you do the fee right, there's a very strong correlation between the cost of the fee and the service rendered. So that's the difference between taxes and fees. Now, stormwater utility in the United States, there are several different fee systems. These are not all of them, but these are the most common. The most common is equivalent residential unit. And in the next few slides, I'm going to define what each one of these fee systems are. And I've been able to identify 818 ERU systems. The next most popular is a tier system. Then comes a flat fee system, a residential equivalence factor, and the dual fee. So let's talk about what those fee systems are. An equivalent residential unit is the average impervious area or hard surface on a single family residential parcel. In the United States, there is typically 3,000 square feet, or about 200 meters squared, is the equivalent residential unit. And normally, the residential customers will pay one fee, or they may split it up and have 2 or 3 tiers in the residential, so that a 500 square foot bungalow is not paying the same as a 10,000 square foot home. Commercial customers pay to the number of parcel ERUs. So for example, if your ERU is 300 meters squared impervious area, and your residential, your monthly fee is $4, your base fee, and let's say a store has 3,000 meters squared, 3,000 divided by 300 gives you 10. You multiply 10 by $4, and so that store would be paying $40 a month, and that's how it works. So for a parcel like this one outlined in red, we would identify the hard surface there, calculate the impervious area of that surface, and then we would charge according to that. Now there is runoff from the pervious area where it can soak into the ground also, but a lot of your runoff is going to come from the impervious area, and there's a high correlation between the stormwater produced that has to be handled and that impervious area. A tier system breaks the impervious area up into several tiers, and within a given tier, that tier is charged the same amount. So for example, you might have a tier where the impervious area, if your impervious area falls anywhere between 0 and 100 meters squared, you might pay a fee of $1 a month. If your impervious area falls between 100 and 200 meters squared, you might pay $2 a month, and so on. A flat fee, you pay one fee for, there's one fee charged for every parcel. Every parcel in town, every property owner gets the same fee. It's very easy to administer, but it's not fair. And then some communities like Warren County, Kentucky, where I'm from, has a dual fee system. So residential customers pay $4 a month, and non-residential customers, commercial customers, pay $11 a month, and that's dual fee. You only have 2 fees. It's very, very simple. And a flat or dual fee may be used to raise money if the community doesn't have the resources to hire a contractor to go out and do an ERU system. So they'll raise money with that, and then they'll hire a contractor to go in and do an ERU system for them. Now, very popular in the state of Minnesota, where we have the most stormwater utilities, is the residential equivalence factor. And what they do there is they actually calculate the runoff from an average single family residential property. And then for all commercial properties, they calculate the runoff from the commercial property, compare it to that average runoff from a single family residential property, take that ratio, multiply it times the base fee, and that's how much they pay. Sounds pretty good, and if it's done right, it can be very good. This is a plot of an ERU fee system. On the y-axis, I have the monthly fee, and on the x-axis, I've got the impervious area. So for example, if you had a very large store or shopping center that had anywhere between 200,000 square feet of hard surface up to 500,000 square feet of hard surface, then they would be paying $350 a month. Now this is a tier system that tracks the ERU fee system fairly well, but they're not all like that. It is possible for the stair steps to kind of deviate in various locations from the ERU fee. And when that happens, you create legal liability for you, because if people figure out that they're having to pay more than they should be paying to fund a stormwater program, they may take you to court. But you need to, if you're going to do a tier system, you need to set it up in a way that's fair. And some of my utility surveys address that particular issue. Well, the only real obstacle we've been able to identify is lack of clear state law that allows you to form a stormwater utility. You'll learn that that was a problem in the state of Alabama. And then you also, some states look to pass laws specifically intended to obstruct the formation of systems like stormwater utilities. And my poster child for that is California Proposition 218, passed about 2 decades ago. And what that says is that no fee, new fee, or tax can be passed without having the voters vote on it. And I believe that that's definitely hampered the formation of stormwater utilities in the state of California. You're going to have voter opposition. Those voters may be people that attend churches that don't want their church having to pay a stormwater utility. But, and a lot of times you will have some opportunistic politician come in and say he's going to repeal the rain tax, and they may actually get elected. That actually happened in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and they repealed their stormwater utility. Then they realized they had a problem. They went back and reenacted it later. But that's the kind of thing that can happen to you. And the people that are going to oppose you are churches. Airports have a lot of pavement, and they're going to be paying a lot. Sometimes they get the runways exempted because it's part of the transportation system, but the hangars and the terminals they have to pay for, but they're going to oppose you. School districts are going to oppose you. Railroads have a problem with it, and federal and state government agencies, and I will return to a state agency with an example here in a minute. So the primary means of attacking is it's a tax. We didn't vote on it, so it's illegal. So they try to prove that it's a tax rather than a fee. Another thing that they might attack it on is if they feel like the fee is not equitably distributed among the customers. And the defense for that is make the fee proportional to the service rendered, have uniform enforcement of your ordinance, and then give credit for best management practices. And my example for that is Blacksburg, Virginia. They have an excellent stormwater credit manual. And there are many communities that have stormwater credit manuals. And if you add up all of the deductions that you can get more than 90% reduction in your stormwater fee if you're willing to do the things down here in the lower right. So having a credit manual and giving reductions in the stormwater fee makes it look more like a fee. If you install a solar power in your home and you take yourself completely off the electric grid, you don't have to pay for electricity. So if you're not, if you do the kind of things that are not going to put a burden on the local stormwater infrastructure, you shouldn't have to pay or have to pay as much. And so that's what a credit manual will do for you. So very personal example, here's how not to do it. In 1999, Huntsville, Alabama had a major flood, and it got me hired as the city hydrologist, and the mayor promised that we were going to do something about Huntsville flood problems. Population of Huntsville is about 170,000, and in the metropolitan area, about 300,000. We had about 7,000 buildings within the 100-year floodplain, and the city of Huntsville had a history of flooding, particularly around downtown. There's a number of streams that come together in right downtown in Huntsville and in the suburbs as well. So the approach that we used, we formed a flood mitigation committee, and we had stakeholders. Stakeholders are not city staff, and they included one person each from each of the 5 city council districts. Each of the council members could appoint their own member to the committee. We had a developer, we had a farmer, we had a member from Tennessee Valley Authority, which produces a lot of the power for the southeastern United States. We invited a member from Redstone Arsenal. Redstone Arsenal is adjacent to Huntsville, and a lot of our streams drain directly into Redstone Arsenal, so anything we do could affect them. Huntsville's in Madison County. We invited the city or the county engineer to be a part of it, and then half of our membership, not quite half, was city staff who would be required to implement any plan that we came up with. We hired one of the top flood mitigation planners in the United States, a fellow named French Wetmore. Well, it's kind of funny to have a flood mitigation planner named Wetmore. He doesn't name his company Wetmore and Associates. Instead, it's French and Associates. He's a friend to today. We started this process, as you can see down below, in 2001. And we were supported by expert advisors. We had for example, we had state climatologist for the Alabama that was a member, and we had other people who supported us as well. So we started out with an initial public meeting. We presented to the people, this is what we're going to do. We're going to come up with a flood mitigation plan to help the people in Huntsville. We had pretty good attendance to that. After that, we had monthly public meetings, and our committee met at those meetings. Private citizens could come and ask questions or express their concerns, and we worked. Our flood mitigation planner came to Huntsville once a month, and after each meeting, he drafted one chapter of our flood mitigation plan based on the information he found. And then at the end, we were scheduled to have our final public meeting. So we began to work in 2001. It went through 2002. Once we had our report, we presented it to our very supportive mayor. And the mayor said, we need to get in front of the Huntsville Times editorial board, the local newspaper, and get them on our side. Sounded like a good idea at the time. So we went and presented to the editorial board. They were behind us 100% all the way. So they published an article that told what we were proposing to do, including a stormwater fee, and they published an editorial in support of our plan. Well, then all hell breaks loose. I always say there were about 200 people in that city of 170,000 that could have not responded worse than if we had proposed to kill the firstborn child of every family in Huntsville. They deluged our city council members with letters, emails, visit. Spittle was flying. It was really awful, and we did not get the people that supported it to come out and support it. So our city council members got the idea that the only people that everybody in Huntsville were against it. So then we had a raucous public meeting with people screaming, and the reaction was totally out of proportion to what we were proposing. We were proposing less than the cost of a glass of wine at a restaurant a month. So it was unbelievable. I was just totally shocked. In the midst of all this, city attorney.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say that's a cracking story. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I should have mentioned at the start that for people to be free to put questions through the question panel on the control panel for the webinar. We have got a couple of questions come in, but I just wanted to mention it on the mic as well. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's
okay. I'll try to answer them as soon as I get through the whole thing. We're leaving time for questions. Okay. So the city attorney comes to me and tells me we don't have a state law that will allow us to form a stormwater utility. I said, what are you talking about? Birmingham, also in Alabama, has a stormwater utility. He says, yes, but the law that allowed them to form the stormwater utility only applies to Class 1 municipalities. Huntsville is a Class 3 municipality. So we needed a state law. There were two approaches. Number one, if we could get all of the Madison County delegation to support it, it was a done deal. A state law that only affects a single community. They don't care about it. If the community's behind it, everything's okay, and that would be all right. So the mayor's office approached the head of the Madison County delegation, and he told the mayor's office, we need a resolution from the city council. And I thought, well, we're screwed, because on a good day, I might be able to get a 3-2 vote, which is not exactly a resounding endorsement. So the initiative stalled. Then in 2003, we get a major flood. All council districts had flooding. I called up the chair of our committee. I said, Ed, it's the big one. He says, we've got to get our resolution on the agenda for the next council meeting. We did. It passed unanimously. We go back to the Madison County delegation. One jackass won't support it. So now we're stuck with going with a statewide law. So we had to do, the easiest way would be to get a law that only applied to Class 3 municipalities. And Montgomery was the other Class 3 municipality. So our mayor's office approached them. They're interested. Then the polls are not looking good, and the mayor decides, our supportive mayor decides not to run for re-election. The new mayor comes in and has no interest in the stormwater utility. Bottom line, we began the process in 2001. It's 2019. Huntsville does not have a stormwater utility to this day. So where did we go wrong? You shouldn't mention a fee until you make the case for it. You need a 1-year multimedia campaign, pictures of every pollution event, every flooding event, every broken pipe, every piece of failed infrastructure. Hit all of the media that you can. It's best to do this immediately following a major flood or a major pollution event. Publish those images. Hire experts who can help you develop a stormwater utility, and there any number of companies would be very happy to do that for a fee. So the presentation to the editorial board of the Huntsville Times was a good idea, but it was premature because we had not made our case yet for it. So things I learned is the best champion in the world can't help you if that person cannot be reelected. After we had the meeting, the final public meeting where everybody's screaming and hollering at us, you know, the very idea of trying to charge us this fee, when all of the malcontents left, the chairman called our committee together, and we sat there in the council chambers, and he says, okay, you heard what people said, let's vote one more time. Do we support a stormwater utility? The vote was unanimous in support of the stormwater utility. So you can educate a few well-informed people, but if you have to educate the entire voting population, it requires most effort. And you got to keep in mind that politicians are normally focused on re-election. You've got to make them look good without being political, because you can always have regime change. So how do you do it right? This is an amazing story, really. Griffin, Georgia is a small town. Today it has a population just over 23,000. And it had a special challenge because it decided to try to enact a stormwater utility, and actually enacted it in 1997, specifically to address Environmental Protection Agency Phase 2 requirements. Now, in the early 90s, our Environmental Protection Agency came out with Phase 1 requirements that only applied to cities large with a population greater than 100,000. But then in 2003, Phase 2 requirements kicked in. In 1997, Griffin, Georgia recognized they were coming, and they were going to be affected by it, and they got in front of the requirements and enacted their own stormwater utility in 1997. And they began by educating their elected officials. They made public education and outreach a priority. And then once they got their funds, they were able to leverage several grant opportunities. Our Federal Emergency Management Agency has a hazard mitigation grant program. And if your grant application is accepted, feds will pay 75% of the cost of that project, and the locals pay 25%, so they can magnify the amount of money they have to do the stormwater program. So not only did they do something very good for the city of Griffin, Georgia, they provided a successful paradigm that other stormwater utilities could follow. So from 1997 to 2019, now there are at least 67 stormwater utilities in Georgia that have formed. Here are some other positive cases. Long Creek Watershed, and the most critical one that we didn't do is the last bullet on each one of these. So what they allowed commercial property owners to do is pay their stormwater fee, and then they did not have to satisfy other regulatory requirements like building large, expensive detention or retention ponds. And in Raleigh, North Carolina, they actually had a program. They went around and met with homeowners groups and other stakeholders groups explaining their need, so that when it was brought up for a vote, you know, they had the political support to be able to enact them. So one other case history, I told you that state agencies are going to oppose you. So 2008, Garden City, Georgia passes a stormwater utility. Then at some point later, the Georgia Attorney General came up with an opinion that some state agencies interpreted to mean that they did not have to pay didn't have to pay stormwater fees. Well, there's an installation of the Department of Agriculture in Garden City, Georgia, and they sent a letter to the stormwater utilities saying, in accordance with the Attorney General's opinion, we will not be paying our stormwater fee. The utility fired back, in accordance with our ordinance, then we will be turning off your water and power. The Department of Agriculture had second thoughts and decided they were going to pay after all. So the lesson here is put some teeth in your ordinance that creates stormwater utility. So here are some successful implementation strategies. Early robust analysis of your actual costs and fees that you're going to need in order to run your stormwater program. Make a fee structure that will be perceived as fair. Good luck with that, but make it fair anyway. So if you're challenged in court, you can demonstrate that it actually is fair. You're going to have to realize that some property owners, particularly churches and other tax exempt organizations, are going to be paying for the first time. Include credits so that if they do certain best management practices, they do not have to, they're not going to have to pay the full amount. Make the fee amounts consistent with those of similar communities, particularly those that are nearby or in the same state. Give accountability for how the funds are spent so that they know what they're being spent on and people are okay with that. Now, one that I don't totally agree with here is keeping fees low on the public radar. And the way you do that, or the way they're suggesting you do that, is on your utility bill. Do not have a separate line item for stormwater fee. Instead, combine it with sanitary sewer fee, which I'm not okay with that. But sometimes you have to do what you have to do. Then you need during the initial billing, the most questions are going to arise, and you make sure you have good people to respond to those and to satisfy those that call in with questions. And then you have to demonstrate continuously that you're providing the promised levels of service that you set up, and you have to have a mechanism to increase fee over time as needs increase and as inflation occurs. So you may feel like that creating a stormwater utility is kind of mission impossible, but if you persevere, you can actually get it done. If you do it in the right way, you can get it done, and you will find out that it is worth the effort to create a stormwater utility. Now, I have provided Andy, sorry about this, Andy, with these slides, and you will, I hope Andy will be able to provide those slides to people that want to reach these links. And I have several links throughout this, and I'm okay with this being sent out freely to anybody that's interested in having the slides. So my final recommendations Make sure you have clear state law that gives you the right to form a stormwater utility. Put some teeth in the ordinance. Be able to turn off their electricity and power if they fail to pay is a good one. A bad one is like Warren County, Kentucky. They said, we can take you to court. And we've had our stormwater utility for just about a decade. And there are people that still not paid, and they're waiting till their fee amounts accumulate to the point where it'll pay to take them to court. So that's not the way to do it. If you're short on resources, begin with a flat fee to raise money and then hire a competent consultant to help you develop an ERU or a similar system. So stormwater utilities are fair. They provide consistent funding. They're fair if you make the right fee system, set up the right fee system. Every community, and it's amazing to me, every community has a different personality. In some communities like Huntsville, Alabama, it's almost a lynch mob. In other communities like Warren County, Kentucky, you have rational opposition, but it doesn't reach the level of lynch mobs, and it passes pretty well. And it depends somewhat on the leadership in your community. Make sure you have clear statutory authority, state law that allows you to form a stormwater utility. Politics does not seem to be a consideration. Put teeth in your ordinance. The first stormwater utility in the United States formed in 1974, and today we have more than 1,700 of them in the intervening 45 years. I suspect we've got over 2,000 in the U.S., and actually I've been able to identify 29 in Canada. So median fee about $4. No city is too small to have a stormwater utility. Most popular fee system is the equivalent residential unit. Stormwater utilities are the best way to fund stormwater, the fairest way, and they are worth the effort. Everybody who has one, every community that has one will tell you that. So thank you for your attention. And I believe now that I will try to answer some of the questions that you have. So let me see if I can find where the questions are. Andy, do you have the questions?
Yeah, I can read them out for you, Warren. So I just want to thank you very much for, I know it's late at night there, so I just want to thank you very much for the time you've given up to give us this comprehensive but very straightforward and practical presentation. I've got two questions here, and it's not too late for you to submit questions if someone else is wanting to submit a question. So the first question is from Andrew. It's a very good question. It says, if a city is comprised of a dozen metropolitan local government areas, which are region-based rather than catchment-based, do you think individual local governments can effectively set up a utility, or do you feel it needs to be a city-wide or catchment-wide based?
You can do it either way. Huntsville, our jurisdiction was only within the city limits of Huntsville, so we had no control outside of Huntsville, and that's part of the reason why we had people on our committee that came from Madison County, the surrounding area, was because some of their rivers came into Huntsville. Flint River came into Huntsville. So, you know, I think you can set them up in individual locations. You do have to work with the other surrounding communities, protect, you know, other government units that are within a catchment that affects you. So you have to work with them. There's no doubt about it. And in Washington State, sometimes what they'll do, there are some areas that have greater flood or pollution problems. And so they may have a different fee for the different areas. But I think it is, you know, it's quite feasible, but you're going to have to work with the surrounding jurisdictions when you do that, when they have part of your catchments.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thanks, Warren. The next question is another good one from David. He says, what might the uptake rate for the Blacksburg Stormwater Credit Scheme amongst the community and commercial properties?
In other words, how many people participate in the credit program?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, but I can guarantee you that I would say that I would be amazed if the majority of commercial properties didn't take advantage at least of a few of the opportunities that are provided in the credit manual. Excuse me just a minute. So I would say most of them at least takes advantage of some of the best management practices.
Yeah. I've got another question here, Warren. Is there any examples of multiple counties getting together and forming one central utility? So could we get a case study on that?
The state of New Hampshire, which does not have any stormwater utilities, it's a small state in the northeastern United States. They are actually investigating the possibility of having a statewide stormwater utility. So that's one example that I can point to where they're actually doing that. I do not know of any other statewide stormwater utilities that are being investigated, but they've actually paid contractors and had universities look at the possibility of doing that. And that's something that's actually in the works. Other than that, there are some watersheds that have stormwater utilities that charge a fee that crosses several jurisdictional lines. There's one in Maine that I'm aware of, well, actually at Long Creek watershed that I mentioned before. But other than that, I'm not aware of any that are, cover multiple jurisdictions, which is not to say that they couldn't. And
Yeah.
like I said, I hope New Hampshire is successful in doing that. And just have statewide.
Is there feasibility studies public documents now that we could look at?
Yeah, I believe they are. I've looked at them. I've downloaded it. If you will just, Google New Hampshire stormwater utility, I think it will probably pop up for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what about like when you say a statewide, but then what if you get like multiple councils or a county? Well, which really comes back to Andrew's question, really. So you've already really answered that. So the last one we've got here is a thanks a million, well done from Dennis. So you have a.
I appreciate it. And I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk to you. I'm 100% behind stormwater utilities. I'm convinced it's absolutely the best way to go. But you're going to have to get a champion. You have to start with your government agency and get a champion. And the more influential that champion is, see, Warren County, Kentucky, we had a judge advocate, which is the head of our, of our county government. He supported it, and he was the champion for it, and he was able to convince other people. So the first step is, get your champion or champions, as many as you can get. Make sure that you have, territorial or state authority. You actually have the law that supports the development of those, and then go from there. And you have to involve the public. Get them to buy into the whole thing is very important. As we learned, we didn't do a very good job of advertising our monthly meetings, and we didn't develop the public support, the political support we needed. Now, if everybody in a council district it wants something to happen, the council member is going to vote for it. There's no doubt about it. If you get a majority of them, he or she is going to vote for it. So that's kind of where you have to begin.
That's good advice, Warren. We'll take that on board. Well, thank you very much. You've finished out 6 minutes before the hour. So we will, no doubt, will be in touch in the future. And I trust you have a good evening. Thanks for staying up late for us.
That's fine, and I've got my contact information there if somebody has another question at some point. Thanks a lot, Andy, for the opportunity. I appreciate it very much.
So thank you very much, Warren. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Good night. And thank you to all the listeners. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll now close out the webinar.